For 40 years, you could hear it coming before you ever saw it. The Detroit Diesel 671, the Screamin' Jimmy, powered over a third of every long-haul truck on American roads by the 1970s. Then, in January 1988, the assembly line went silent for good. How did one engine come to define an entire era of American trucking, and why does its absence still haunt the people who depended on it? Detroit, 1938. Inside the sprawling General Motors diesel division, a new kind of engine took shape on the factory floor. The Series 71 line, with the 671 model at its heart, rolled out as a direct answer to the rising demands of a world on the brink of war. That first year, the assembly lines were modest. Just a few thousand engines were built, each one hand-checked by crews who knew their work would soon be tested far from home. By 1941, as war swept across continents, the Detroit plant was running around the clock. 3 shifts, more than 2,300 workers, and a sense of urgency that never let up. Production jumped from 9,000 engines in 1941 to a staggering 62,000 by 1944. The 671 was not just powering trucks and buses anymore. It became the muscle behind the United States Army's M4A2 Sherman tanks, often paired as twin units in the 6046 tank pack, with 2 engines working in sync, bolted together by hands that still remember the heat, the noise, and the pride of those days. A retired assembler from the Detroit plant once recalled the rhythm of the line. You would hear the clatter of rods, the hiss of air tools, and sometimes when the door swung open, the sound of a finished engine firing for the first time. For many, the 671 was more than a machine. It was a lifeline, a ticket to steady work, and a promise that American know-how could answer any challenge. Hidden inside its cast iron block was a design secret that would soon change the rules for engines everywhere. 6 cylinders, each at 71 cubic inches, gave the 6-71 its name, and 426 cubic inches of displacement. But its real distinction came from the 2-stroke cycle and the Roots blower, a mechanical lung that forced air through the block, earning it the nickname Screamin' Jimmy. The blower's high-pitched whine cut through the low, steady rumble of the pistons, a sound that carried down city streets and across truck stops. A diesel mechanic, hands marked by years of work, described the routine: check the blower gears, listen for that even whine, watch for the first haze of black smoke as the throttle opened. The Roots blower pushed a full charge of air with every revolution, making the 2-stroke possible: fresh air in, exhaust out, all in a single downstroke. This gave the 6-71 a power pulse on every turn, delivering 230 horsepower and 440 pound-feet of torque in its naturally aspirated form, or up to 300 horsepower and 600 pound-feet with a turbo. Fuel consumption hovered around 6 gallons per hour at cruise. Well maintained, these engines ran 3,000 to 4,000 hours before overhaul. Simplicity defined the design: timing gears, injectors, and that relentless blower. Each service was a ritual, every sound a clue to survival, setting the stage for future battles over emissions. By the early 1950s, the Detroit Diesel 671 had moved from the war front to the backbone of American freight. GMC and Chevrolet were the first to install these engines in their heavy-duty trucks, setting off a wave of civilian adoption that would reshape the industry. Roadway Express and McLean Trucking, 2 of the biggest names in long-haul freight, built their fleets around the 671, trusting its steady pull and reliability to keep their rigs moving coast to coast. Registration data from the 1970s shows Detroit Diesel holding a commanding 37% share of the heavy-duty diesel market, a figure that dwarfed the competition and made the 671 nearly synonymous with American trucking. A retired driver, now in his 80s, still remembers a run he made in 1952 from Detroit to Los Angeles, 2,700 miles without a single missed beat. He recalls the steady whine of the blower, the way the engine would settle into its groove on a long grade, and how every truck stop along the way seemed to echo with the same familiar sound. For him, and for thousands like him, the 671 wasn't just an engine, it was the heartbeat of a way of life. The country depended on these trucks and the trucks depended on their Jimmy. But as the highways filled and the years rolled on, new pressures began to gather on the horizon, threatening the reign of the two-stroke king. The Clean Air Act of 1970 imposed a new reality on American diesel engines. For years, the Detroit Diesel 6-71's two-stroke design had ruled highways, prized for its mechanical simplicity and steady power. But the law's national emissions standards enforced by the Environmental Protection Agency demanded reductions in nitrogen oxides, hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide, limits that arrived in 1974, tightened in 1977, and again in 1985. No two-stroke diesel had ever faced such scrutiny. An engine historian paging through technical bulletins lays out the dilemma. The 6-71's roots blower and uniflow scavenging filled the cylinders with every stroke, boosting power but also sending unburned fuel and heat out the exhaust. Retrofit attempts multiplied, water in fuel blends, retarded injector timing, and bolt-on catalytic converters. In 1976, a 10% water diesel mix cut hydrocarbon and carbon monoxide emissions by 13%, but increased cylinder wear and made cold starts unreliable. Retarding timing dropped nitrogen oxide slightly but sapped the torque drivers relied on. Catalytic converters failed to function as the exhaust never reached the heat needed for proper operation, and the added back pressure choked the blower. By 1985, the EPA's nitrogen oxide ceiling of 10.7 grams per brake horsepower hour was out of reach. No retrofit or adjustment could bring the old two-stroke into compliance. The fate of the 671 was sealed. The decision came down in January 1988. Management delivered the news by memo. Production of the Detroit Diesel 671 would end before the year was out. For the men and women on the line, the words landed hard. Some had spent decades tightening the same bolts, checking the same clearances, watching engines roll past on the conveyor. The plant's rhythm, once measured in the clatter of air tools and the thump of finished blocks, began to slow. Orders dried up. Overtime disappeared. The last shift arrived late that year. Workers gathered at their stations, knowing each step was final. One UAW foreman who had started on the floor in the 1960s later recalled standing at the end of the line as the final engine came through. He remembered the silence when the conveyor stopped and the weight of that moment, 50 years of noise and motion, now finished. There were no speeches, just a few men lingering over their tools, reluctant to let go. For the city, the shutdown was another blow. For the people inside, it was the end of a craft, a way of life, and the last day anyone would hear a new 671 fire up in Detroit. When the Detroit Diesel 671 left the assembly line for the last time, the story didn't end for the men and women who depended on it. Across the country, owner-operators faced a tough decision: keep their old rigs alive or invest in a new four-stroke engine. The numbers were sobering. A full repower could run between $12,000 and $15,000, enough to buy a good used car in the 1990s. For those who stuck with their Jimmy, an in-frame overhaul cost $4,000 to $5,000, provided they could find genuine parts. But after the factory closed, the supply of original injectors, blower housings, and timing gears began to dry up. Counterfeit parts flooded the market. Federal agents seized shipments of fake injectors and knockoff blowers in the mid-1990s, leaving mechanics wary and truckers stranded while waiting for the real thing to surface. Yet the engine's following never faded. In Iowa, a retired owner-operator rebuilt his 1952 GMC, swapping stories about repower costs and the heartbreak of unreliable parts. He joined the Detroit Diesel two-stroke owners group, one of more than 250 members worldwide who keep a running registry of surviving trucks. Their annual reunion runs are less about miles than memories, rolling out just to hear the old whine echo across the lot. Museums too have stepped in. The American Truck Historical Society, the Henry Ford Museum, and the Iowa 80 Truck Museum each preserve a 671 engine, engines polished and running. Their sound drawing visitors who remember when that voice meant a living. For curators, the pride is personal. They talk about the engine as a living artifact, a piece of working-class history that refuses to be silenced. In garages, in museums, and on the open road, the 671 endures, not as a relic but as a testament to the people who kept it running year after year. Today, no new engine rolls off the line in Detroit, yet more than 1.2 million 671 engines still echo through memory and machine. For those who hauled America's freight, that sound is a promise kept. It is a promise of work done, miles earned, and a world that built its future one gear at a time.